Have you noticed how some people quietly build real wealth while others scream richness on social media and drown in debt? There is a very specific mental pattern in people who build fortunes in silence. I have studied this phenomenon for years. I discovered something striking. Those who truly prosper operate with a psychology completely different from those who show off and earn little. In this narration, I will do a full scan of the minds of these two tribes. I will show how your inner story decides whether you are wired to accumulate real wealth or only its illusion. This is a brutal analysis of the relationship between your mind and the money that comes in or slips away. You will see exactly why the discreet attract abundance and the ostentatious repel real prosperity. More importantly, I will give you how to reprogram your brain to function like the truly wealthy. The question is simple. Is your behavior with money moving you towards silent wealth or keeping you in impoverishing showmanship? That opening scene looks simple. A flashy image, likes pouring in, a bank account silently bleeding. But that simplicity hides a complex structure. I want to translate that scene into a diagnostic. When someone prioritizes image over substance, a set of automatic responses turns on. The mind starts to defend a story. The story shapes decisions. The decisions shape outcomes. This is not accidental. It is a pattern that repeats. Most people in this group tell themselves a kind of myth. Outwardly they say, I am investing in my image. Inside they whisper, if I do not seem wealthy, I will be invisible. They dress it up with language about branding, charisma, and opportunity. They quote ideas about being recognized and attracting clients. They use noble words like authenticity and hustle, but beneath the words there is a need. The need is to be noticed as valuable. That need becomes the lens through which every financial choice is made. They have two voices. The one they show the world is polished. It sounds confident. It sounds like a manifesto about living their dream. The one they tell themselves at night is fragile. It sounds like fear. It says, I must appear before I become. They sleep repeating this chant. That internal script organizes behavior more than any plan they make. Watch their routine, and you will see the divergence. On payday, they experience a pressure that is not practical. It is social pressure. The first impulse is to allocate funds to visible symbols. The car upgrade becomes more urgent than an investment. The designer bag gets purchased before the emergency fund exists. A trip is booked to a destination that photographs well. The monthly budget is adjusted to feed appearances. This is a recurring choreography. When extra money arrives, it flows predictably. A bonus becomes a showpiece. A raise is celebrated with outward display. Unexpected gifts are turned into stories for the feed. When there is lack, the same pattern kicks in. They borrow to maintain the image. They slide into financing. Cards are pushed, limits stretched. Each month, they trade future options for present impression. The small wins are broadcast. The long-term stability is ignored. This pattern hides behind noble-sounding beliefs. Many believe they attract clients by looking the part. They believe the universe rewards visible success. They equate admiration with opportunity. I have heard them say, perception precedes reality. They use that phrase like a shield. It gives a sense of strategy, but the strategy often confuses style with substance. Let me be clear. Image can open doors, but only when backed by real capacity. What kills accumulation is not a taste for quality. It is substituting appearance for asset. It is choosing the car so you can look rich, instead of choosing an investment that would make you wealthy. That substitution is the heart of the contradiction I keep seeing. Now watch how they interpret the world. They read signals in a biased way. When an influencer with high engagement recommends a product, they see confirmation. When a wealthy-looking person attends an event, they take it as proof that glamour equals success. They collect anecdotes like badges. These become the evidence for their narrative. They do not test their thesis with balance sheets. They test it with likes. Inside, the emotional knot is deeper. They often possess a shame that lives under the glamour. Shame about origin. Shame about the slow path. Shame that others will measure them by their possessions. So they use objects to silence shame. A new phone is a sedative. A business class photo is a balm. The relief is brief. It never lasts. The need returns with the next comparison. This is why a diagnosis must separate rhetoric from practice. Rhetoric is what they say. Practice is what they do every month. The rhetoric promises abundance. The practice delivers scarcity. The gap between these two is the real problem. It teaches them false lessons. When a showy move gets applause, they feel validated. The applause becomes a reward stronger than financial prudence. That reward conditions repetition. I also notice a moral tactic in their speech. Many claim to be different from greedy rich people. They say they are ethical, spiritual, or creators. They insist that money is secondary. Yet their pattern betrays that money is central. This contradiction creates guilt. Guilt then drives more acting out. They attempt to appear humble while buying status. The inner conflict worsens the cycle. Let me give you a scene that repeats in my notes. I met a man I will call Daniel. He owns a small chain of cafes. When I first saw him online, he looked like an overnight success. His cafes had marble counters and an aesthetic that begged for photographs. He posted interviews where he spoke about mission and craft. He talked about reinvesting profits. That was the story. The reality was different. He had tiny margins. He had no reserve. He had taken a loan for interior design. He refused to lower prices or cut the expensive lease. He believed the visual brand would bring investors. It did not. The money dried up. He started leasing cars for PR photos. He took credit to pay suppliers. One night he sat at his counter and cried. The image had cost him his business. That is not failure. It is a predictable consequence. Across these people, I map common features. They spend first for impression. They plan later. They avoid spreadsheets. They avoid plain financial literacy. They prefer narratives. Numbers feel brutal. The more they avoid, the more the gap grows. Avoidance protects ego in the short run. It kills options in the long run. Now look at how they talk about the universe. They often use spiritual language. They say, money is energy, or I am manifesting. This talk gives them moral permission to avoid planning. When asked about savings, they smile and say the money will flow. It becomes a strategy of denial. They outsource responsibility to destiny. That is the cleverest trick. If the universe will supply, then they can keep performing. This creates a paradox of passivity disguised as faith. At this point, I want to pause and thank you for being here. This channel is young. Every subscription helps me reach 1,000 viewers so I can keep studying these patterns. If you are watching from a city outside my own, tell me where you are in the comments. Your location helps me see how these patterns vary globally. I appreciate you staying with the diagnosis. Returning to the pattern, there is a predictable financial shape to this lifestyle. They commit up to 70% of income to visible items. They accept high fixed costs. They prefer the appearance of abundance to the structure of savings. Each expense becomes a vote against future freedom. They rarely consider opportunity cost. Rarely do they ask, what could this payment fund instead? Their default question is, how will this look? This orientation also affects relationships and work. They hire to maintain image more than to grow capacity. They network in scenes that value optics. Their partners often become complicit. They trade real mentors for social supporters. That social feedback loop can feel safe. It is not. It fosters insulation. The world continues to respond to visible richness, but the depth behind that image remains shallow. I want to describe another person so you feel the pattern in a new register. Her name is Maria. She runs an online consultancy. She dressed her office with a luxury backdrop to signal credibility. She took photos in a rented penthouse for her launch. Clients came at first. Many were curious. But when larger contracts were available, she lacked the systems. She had no documented process. She had no cash reserve to scale. When a big opportunity demanded deliverables, she had to refuse. The facade had created initial traction, but it had not built competency. Her reputation thinned. She fell back on smaller gigs. These two strategies are incompatible over time. You cannot compound and simultaneously spend the yield on applause. The more you spend the yield, the slower the compound. The slower the compound, the more you must continue spending to prove value. It becomes a treadmill. This is the architecture that makes their lives feel urgent and thin. They feel successful in snapshots. They feel powerless in real life. That tension increases anxiety. It also leads to avoidance of real conversations about money. They will hire advisors who flatter rather than correct. They will repeat their story to journalists. They will not face the spreadsheets. Their short-term relief then becomes longer-term collapse. At the end of this block, you might be wondering where this pattern shades into the subtypes. The truth is this pattern shows up in different masks. Sometimes the mask is insecurity. Sometimes it is the show of a founder. Sometimes it is addiction to approval. Sometimes it is spiritual denial. Each mask needs a different approach. In the next part 1, we'll map the common subtypes in detail. I will paint their day-to-day life. I will give you mirror sentences you can test on yourself. If you think you could be one of them, you will recognize it clearly. Which mask are you wearing? That question will lead into the next section. All of the people I described belong to one tribe, but that tribe contains distinct species. The fear at the center dresses in many costumes. I will show you 4 of the most frequent subtypes. I will start with the most socially acceptable and move to the most dangerous. You will probably see fragments of yourself in more than one. That is normal. These patterns are not exclusive. The first subtype I call the insecure image maker. He or she believes the outer sign equals inner worth. The day begins with a performance. They choose outfits that photograph well. They time posts for maximum impact. They rehearse lines about purpose. Their inner monologue is a loop. It says, if I do not look successful, I am invisible. When money arrives, they spend on what others will see. New phone, dinner at a trending restaurant, weekly grooming sessions. They reduce risk by maintaining appearance even when it reduces resilience. Let me show you a day in the life. They wake and scroll. They compare. They feel a small sting. They decide to treat that sting with a purchase. It is a quick fix. They feel better for an hour. At work, they push to impress. They accept a client meeting that will look good on the feed. They tack on an overpriced lunch. At night, they pay bills, then swipe for a new accessory. The accessory arrives and signals approval. The cycle repeats. Their core belief is simple. Respect comes from how they present. This belief shapes every choice. The outcome is unstable finances and fragile esteem. They are endlessly exhausted by performing. If you recognize this script, do not mistake compassion for softness. This is a full pattern that erodes options. The second subtype I call the faux CEO. This one dresses like a leader to attract leaders. They rent offices, lease cars for pitches, and maintain an image of scale. They speak constantly about vision and disruption. Their inner line reads, to attract high-value clients, I must look the part now. The risk here is a strategic misallocation. They buy fixed costs before proving their offering. A typical day opens with a photo shoot. They rehearse brand talk. They book meetings in upscale neighborhoods. They host small panels to show social proof. They negotiate contracts while mentally counting how to cover the next lease payment. When revenue lags, they borrow to keep the appearance. Debt accumulates. The business then becomes a show to support the show. Real growth stalls. Pride keeps them doubling down. Faux CEOs often have good instincts. They are bold, but they confuse stagecraft for scalability. The belief that image alone will attract real customers is the belief that collapses them. If you are this type, your public is large. Your real capital is small. That gap must be closed with hard metrics, not better photos. The third subtype is the social validator. This type looks for identity in external applause. Their self-view mirrors online feedback. They change phones on release day. They take last-minute vacations arranged for visuals. They curate every angle of life. Their internal script says, my worth equals the number of admiring eyes. They experience mood swings tied to notifications. A day looks polished and unstable. They wake to check mentions. They schedule posts to maximize envy. They measure relationships by likes. Financially, they prioritize experiences that photograph well. They will occasionally borrow for travel. The temporary highs from admiration keep them trapped. When the engagement dips, they feel abandoned. That abandonment prompts another purchase. This subtype is dangerous because validation replaces self-regard. They are open to influence and difficult to anchor. Their solution must include rerouting identity to internal standards, not external rewards. The fourth subtype is the financial denier. This person can make good money. They often have talent and opportunity. Their issue is refusal to face numbers. They avoid bank statements. They believe that money is energy and that worry blocks flow. So they treat financial planning as a moral failure. They delegate to others or to fate. A day for them is erratic. They earn, then spend impulsively on status. They do not track cash. They resist budgets. They will explain their choices with metaphors about abundance. When a creditor calls, they respond with optimism. The problem escalates quickly. Without visibility, there is no correction. They are sliding toward collapse while believing they are aligned with providence. The belief that if I appear wealthy, the universe will reward me is common across all subtypes. But each subtype translates that belief into different behaviors. The insecure image maker seeks immediate respect. The faux CEO builds headline credibility. The social validator builds identity from applause. The financial denier avoids intimacy with numbers. The outward motions differ. The inner engine is the same. I will now unpack each subtype with more nuance. For the insecure image maker, the trap is easy to overlook. They can seem harmless. They buy small luxuries. Friends admire them. But the accumulation of small choices drains options. When a real opportunity demands capital, they have none. Shame returns. Shame demands bigger displays. The spiral widens. In one case, I watched a woman named Anna. She worked in tech. Her feed was aesthetic. She posted about values and travel. She rented a city apartment for 2 years because it matched her brand. She financed renovations on credit. When layoffs came, she had no buffer. She sold items in panic. The image survived online while her life unraveled offline. Anna's story repeats at scale. It is a cautionary tale about confusing branding with wealth. Faux CEOs often start with legitimate confidence. They may have an actual team and some clients. The danger is the treadmill of fixed costs. Leasing a showroom to impress investors costs thousands. The show must be sustained. I know a founder who spent his seed capital on a ceremonial launch. The event got press. Investors eyed it, but they asked for traction. Traction needed resources. The founder had spent them. He then sold equity under pressure. The image made the deal look attractive. The result was dilution and loss of control. For the social validator, the psychology is clear and pitiless. Identity anchored to approval is volatile. 1 month of high engagement can lead to reckless spending. The next month, the engagement drops. The resulting panic causes further spending to recover the feeling. It is a behavioral loop identical to addiction. The treatment is work on self-definition and re-anchoring to projects that provide mastery independent of applause. The financial denier is perhaps the closest to the classic story of looks rich, cash poor. They often hide behind philosophies. Their language about energy and flow can sound wise. It functions as a protective armor. It absolves them from mundane responsibility. But finance is not a moral test. It is a mechanical system. It requires attention. Denial is the shortcut that leads to collapse. After describing each subtype, I must stress what they share. They all externalize value. They all avoid the discipline of compound decisions. They all trade future capacity for present impression. In each case, the universe responds with the only thing it can: consistency. Reality matches the decisions. Display without backing produces more display. The world then offers opportunities that reward image. that further trains the person to continue the pattern. You might feel Finally, before we move on to the hidden law that ties them together, let me leave you with a practical test. Pick the last 3 purchases you made that felt urgent. For each ask, did I buy this for substance or appearance? If 2 out of 3 are appearance, you are in a pattern that will erode options. That is not a verdict. It is data. In the next section, I will name the invisible law that all these subtypes activate. I will explain, in clear mechanics, how a repeated pattern of substitutions produces the exact reality you can now begin to see. Understanding that law is the small step that precedes real reprogramming. You will want to hear it because it explains why the universe shows up like it does. What you do next will determine whether that explanation becomes justification or remedy. I call it the law of the inversion of value. I give it a stern name because it behaves like a law. It is not a moral judgment. It is a pattern I observe again and again. When someone trains their mind to prefer impression over substance, reality replies with the only honest thing it can, matching results. The world mirrors your persistent choices. The law is simple on paper and brutal in practice. You prioritize how things look. You prioritize the approval that images buy. Your decisions shift accordingly. A car replaces capital. A photo shoot replaces a hiring process. The ledger shrinks while the feed blooms. The law takes those choices and compounds them. Over time, appearance compounds into habit. Habit compounds into expense structures. And expense structures compound into a life that must always perform to survive. Here is the sequence in plain terms. A stimulus appears: a promotion, a raise, a viral post. You interpret that stimulus through a narrative about self-worth. That interpretation becomes a thought. If I do not signal this, I will lose status. Thought creates emotion relief at the idea of a solution or fear of invisibility. The emotion drives a decision. Spend now, demonstrate now. The decision changes your posture toward money. That posture becomes chronic. Repeat enough times. The pattern hardwires. This flow looks abstract when I describe it. It is not. It plays out in kitchen table scenes. I have watched it in restaurants. I have watched it in boardrooms. I have watched it in DMs at midnight. Someone gets a bonus. They eye the feed of a peer. That peer is driving a new car. The bonus is already reframed as the car fund. They sign a loan in the next week. The loan becomes a fixed cost, and the math that once made sense for investing evaporates. That is the law doing its quiet work. The law has 3 behavioral bricks. First, confirmation bias. People in this pattern do not collect balance sheets. They collect stories. A single anecdote of a glamorous life becomes evidence for their thesis. Second, substitution. Every choice is an opportunity cost. When you use a lump sum for an image, you have implicitly declared that impression is more valuable than capacity. Third, reward miscalibration. Likes and applause function as reinforcers stronger than compound interest in the short run. The brain learns faster from applause than from spreadsheets. Because of those bricks, the law is self-reinforcing. Likes reward the display. Display attracts shallow opportunities. Shallow opportunities require more display. Your world becomes structured by what is visible, not by what is real. You start to interpret scarcity as external bad luck rather than the predictable outcome of repeated choices. That misreading protects the ego. It keeps denial functional. It keeps the pattern alive. I want to be precise about the universe here. When I say the universe mirrors you, I mean reality responds to your net choices. The universe is not a moral judge sentencing someone to poverty for being vain. It is a ledger. It sums. If you consistently trade future capacity for present applause, the ledger shows that exchange. The consequences arrive as scarcity, missed opportunities, exhausted reserves, a compromised business when scale is required. The mirror shows up and forms that matter. Investors look at traction, creditors look at cash flow, partners look at systems. None of them are fooled by staging for long. There is a cognitive mechanism that makes this feel like destiny. People in this pattern interpret noise as signal. They see one person at a gala and conclude that glamour equals competence. They treat visible success as proof of competence and invisible competence as irrelevant. The wiring is subtle. When you are taught to value surface, all surface becomes evidence. The mind picks anecdotes, arranges them into a narrative, and then reduces the world to that narrative. It then seeks confirmation. The law then provides the confirmation, because the narrative shaped the decisions that produced matching outcomes. You must understand the emotional circuitry beneath these decisions. Shame sits at the center. Shame about origin, shame about being slower than peers, shame about being measured by possessions. Shame is corrosive. It wants silence. It does not want to be examined. So the pattern uses objects as anesthetic. A phone, a table at a restaurant, a rented penthouse for photos, these are sedatives. They offer temporary relief from the ache of not being enough. The relief is immediate and effective. That is why the behavior is so seductive. Now imagine that relief repeated. Each purchase is a short-term fix. Each fix rewires the reward center. The brain learns that relief comes from spectacle. The person becomes a conditioned organism. They move toward what soothes the shame more than they move toward what builds security. The law of the inversion of value treats that pattern like an input and yields consistent outputs, instability, and systemic fragility. Let me give you a concrete, staged example I return to when I teach this. A founder gets a seed check of $200K. They believe the visual must reflect the ambition. They rent a space with marble counters. They hire a high-end design firm. The launch is beautiful. The press is kind. Investors notice headlines, but then request metrics. The metrics demand proven unit economics. The runway is shortened by the design and lease. Now the founder faces a choice under time pressure. Prove traction with limited capital or double down on the image to attract a larger check. Often they double down. Why? Because the immediate applause is intoxicating and because the mind reads the press as validation of the original belief that appearance equals success. The law of inversion has done its work. There is also an epistemic consequence, a feedback loop of poor learning. When reality punishes a decision, say a failed hire after a flashy launch, the person often does not attribute failure to the substitution of image for substance. They attribute it to bad timing, poor market conditions, or to the universe not recognizing their energy. That misattribution preserves the myth. It ensures the loop continues. The correct lesson would be painful. I spent my runway on optics, and I must now rebuild. Pain causes change. Avoidance preserves the old script. A crucial practical point is that this law does not only punish with scarcity. It narrows options. When you spend your cash flow on optics, you reduce your future capacity to pivot. You trade optionality for a specific narrative to protect. That trade is often invisible at first. Monthly installments look small, but options multiply by time. The more you compress choice by feeding appearance, the fewer future moves you can make. That is a slow violence. It shows up as inability to hire talent, inability to hold pricing, inability to negotiate from strength. The image is expensive in 1,000 tiny ways. You are probably thinking now of someone you know. You might even be thinking of yourself. That is unavoidable. The law is not an abstract theory for a laboratory. It is a pattern lived in kitchens, offices, and bedrooms. The next step is to see how the law operates inside each subtype I described earlier. The law is the hidden engine behind their differences. It translates personal scripts into shared outcomes. Understanding the law is the first real leverage. Before I move on, I want to give you one mental tool. Whenever you meet a decision point that tempts display, run a 2-question test. First, ask, will this purchase increase my capacity in 1 year? Then ask, will this purchase strengthen my optionality? If the answers are no or murky, you are flirting with the law of the inversion of value. That question interrupts the automatic script. It creates a micro space of reflection. That space is where reprogramming begins. There is one more layer, which is spiritual but practical. People often defend their choice. I will show you how the law works in the wild, the full cycle of self-sabotage, and the exact place where the pattern breaks. If you want to change, you will need to see the machinery operate, and then intentionally insert new behavior where the old one used to run. The law will not surrender because you understand it. It will change only when you change the input it receives. One last caution before we move. This law is merciless, but predictable. That is good news. If you have patterns that have produced scarcity, they did so for a reason. You can trace the reason. You can interrupt it. You can design decisions that feed a different mirror. But first you must stop pretending that applause equals capital. Only then can you begin to align what you show the world with what actually secures your future. In the next section, I will show you the cycle in action and how it repeats until someone breaks it with real, sustained discipline. The cycle of self-sabotage is where the law of inversion of value becomes a machine. It moves in 4 predictable turns. Each turn is simple. Together, they make a loop that is invisible from the inside. That invisibility is the cruel part. You feel justified at every step. The brain does not sense a trap. It senses relief. Turn 1, activation. A vulnerability wakes. It could be shame after scrolling, the sting of a comparison, or the thrill of a potential deal. This vulnerability is not a moral failing. It is human, but the way the mind responds matters. The activation becomes a question. How do I fix this feeling? For those stuck in the pattern, the answer is almost always external. Buy attention, create scene, perform. Turn 2, performance. The person chooses the visible fix. A membership, a designer bag, a staged launch, a hire to hold image. The decision is fast because it buys immediate relief. The mind values immediate relief over delayed security. It is wired that way. The applause follows. The relief arrives. The loop rewards itself. Turn 3, short-term reinforcement. Likes, compliments, client curiosity. These are real reinforcers. The brain registers success. It rewires associations. Spectacle equals relief. This rewiring is powerful because it feels like evidence. The person points to the engagement as proof their strategy works. They rarely check the ledger. Turn 4, long-term consequence. Here the pattern pays its toll. Cash reserves dwindle. Fixed costs rise. Options narrow. An unexpected expense becomes a crisis. A real opportunity requiring capital becomes impossible. The person experiences shame again, now deeper. The solution feels like more spectacle. The loop tightens. I want to put names and scenes on that abstract loop. Manuel is a compact case study. He is salaried, competent, and anxious about status. Payday arrives. He feels a pressure that is not financial. It is social. He sees a friend post from a restaurant he wants to claim for his own narrative. He buys the meal on credit. He posts. The likes come. He feels temporarily validated. Weeks later, a course that would upskill him and materially increase his salary appears. He cannot afford it without saving. He chooses not to save. He chooses more outings, more accessories. The course passes. The friend climbs. Manuel stays. The loop has taught him the wrong lesson. Carla's story is a business-level replay. She launches a consultancy. Early revenue is inconsistent. She believes that a luxurious office will accelerate trust. She signs a high-rent lease. The office looks impressive online. She wins a few small clients who correspond with the image, but not the scale she needs. Then a large contract appears that requires documented processes and a delivery team. Carla lacks both. She cannot pivot into it without capital and structure. The fixed costs bleed her. The office becomes a monument to choice, not to capacity. She retires to smaller gigs to pay the lease. Her brand remains glossy. Her business erodes. Every example reveals the same microdynamics. The immediate reward shapes learning. The short-term good feels like proof. The long-term cost is painfully coherent. And the person trapped in the loop often uses the consequence as further proof that urgency requires more spectacle. If I had just looked richer sooner, is the thought that keeps the loop spinning. It is circular reasoning dressed as strategy. The cycle also operates in spiritual language. I call it the theology of avoidance. When people say money is energy as a way to avoid planning, they are not being mystical. They are deflecting responsibility. That language is often sincere. But sincerity does not equal competence. The loop loves any narrative that absolves the person from practical steps. The universe will provide becomes a ticket to inaction. Inaction compounds. Scarcity arrives. The mind interprets scarcity as proof that the universe is testing them, or that timing is wrong. Again, the trap seals itself. There is a social dynamic to the loop as well. The person curates a circle that applauds the image. Those friends and followers serve a function. They are low-cost validators. They relieve shame without asking for growth. This social feedback is essential to the loop's persistence. It is comfortable to surround yourself with people who admire the performance and avoid those who will call for accountability. The network becomes a mirror that shows only chosen angles. That curated mirror is dangerously selective. You might ask, why don't advisors or mentors correct this? Some do, but the person trapped by the loop avoids hard truths. They hire flatterers or PR consultants. They avoid accountants. When confronted with financial reality, they rationalize. I'm investing in brand becomes shorthand. They will shop for advisors who confirm rather than correct. This explains why the loop often accelerates in public personas that look competent but are structurally fragile. The cycle has particular tempos depending on income. For some it is fast, instant purchases, revolving credit, repeated spikes of visibility, and deeper troughs. For others, it is slower, consistent small leaks that erode decades of compound advantage. In both cases, the result is the same, fewer choices over time. Financial fragility grows like rust, imperceptible until a bolt snaps. Understanding the cycle is not merely academic. If you can catch it at the activation phase, you can reroute it. The single most useful intervention I have seen is a pause. A 2-hour or 2-day pause before any visible expenditure. Call it delayed discipline. When you pause, you break the chain between emotion and decision. You create a space to ask the right questions. Is this for substance or appearance? What will this cost in opportunity? How would a conservative option look? Let me be clear, pausing is not asceticism. It is recalibration. It trains a muscle. That muscle responds to scaffolding. If you install small rituals, weekly reviews, a savings first autopay, a rule that any purchase above X requires a 30-day cooling off, you create structural friction. Friction reduces impulsivity. It also gives reality time to speak. When reality speaks, it often advises investment, not image. There is another intervention that is psychological and spiritual. I ask people to reframe the idea of being seen. Instead of equating visibility with worth, I coach them to make competence their visibility. This is not public stunt work. It is slow work, documented processes, scalable delivery, investment in systems, and a reserve that lets you accept risk without panic. Competence shows up as fewer crises, not as louder nights out. Over time, competence changes how the world responds. Clients come with deeper contracts. Partners stay. That is a different mirror. The danger is that people resist slow work because it does not feel gratifying. It does not produce immediate applause. So the psychological work is to turn satisfaction into the rewards of capacity. Celebrate the reserve built. Celebrate a month without a surprise expense. Celebrate delivering a complex client project without needing to stage a moment. Gradually, the reward system shifts away from applause and toward competence. However, shifting reward systems is not easy. The loop fights back. Old cues, the scroll, the comparison, the fear still appear. The person needs both internal practices and external accountability. Internally, they must cultivate a new narrative. A simple sentence I give people to repeat is, I will measure my progress by the assets I hold, not by the applause I attract. It is not a mantra meant to comfort. It is a cognitive re-anchor. The next part will show you the inevitable breaking point, that most people hit the point when the facade collapses and the decision you make next determines the future of your life and business. That moment is savage, but also clarifying. It exposes where your loyalties truly lie, to image or to freedom. In the following section, I will detail how that rupture occurs and what the two possible paths look like. There is a breaking point. It arrives with a peculiar combination of scale and scarcity. The costs grow heavy enough that they cannot be carried by improvisation. The debts stack into deadlines. The attention of your audience no longer pays bills. At first, it looks like a sequence of small failures. Then it feels like a collapse. I have watched it happen often enough to map its phases. Phase 1, the minor shock. A card is declined at a moment of pride. A supplier threatens to stop deliveries. An investor asks for audited figures you do not have. These are embarrassments, and they sting. For some, the sting causes temporary correction. For others, it begins the descent. Phase 2, the structural squeeze. Your fixed costs are higher than your margins can sustain. The business or household has a mismatch between commitment and cash flow. The staged lifestyle now requires constant inflows. The inflows dry. The person begins to borrow. The borrowing is framed as temporary. Temporary becomes perpetual. Phase 3, public exposure. The mask slips in a visible way. A founder posts a first-class selfie, then returns to find the office padlocked. An influencer films a luxury routine, while their landlord hands an eviction notice to a neighbor. Shame becomes social facts. The world begins to interpret them differently. The people who once admired the image now gossip about the mismatch. The social mirror pivots from applause to schadenfreude. Phase 4, existential pivot. The person stands at a crossroads. One route deepens the illusion. They double down. They stage an even larger display to stave off panic. They take predatory loans. They pursue vanity partnerships. This route often accelerates collapse. The other route is brutal honesty. They stop performing. They inventory damage. They call creditors. They renegotiate leases. They admit to hires that the operation must shrink, and then they begin rebuilding from substance. The pivot is the moment of truth. If you choose performance, you run faster on a treadmill to nowhere. If you choose honesty, you choose to shrink public image and grow internal capacity. That choice is not aesthetic. It determines whether you will have options in 5 years. I want to tell you about two people who reached this pivot in different ways. Daniel was the cafe owner I described earlier. He chose performance at every fork. Even when the rent was late, he hosted an anniversary party and rented a luxury car for the photos. The crowd loved it. Investors were curious. But curiosity is not capital. Eventually, suppliers cut him off. He closed the doors. The image survived online. Debt survived offline. He swallowed immense shame. His friends told stories about the posts he used to make. The business was not salvageable. Maria, the consultant, arrived at the pivot differently. She had rented the penthouse for her launch. When the larger contract appeared, she recognized she could not deliver without documented workflows and a team. She could have staged another launch and hoped. Instead, she paused the feeds. She documented processes, hired a junior to handle delivery, and offered the client a realistic, phased scope. That move required admitting smallness publicly. It felt dangerous, but the client respected the clarity. The contract scaled. Maria kept the business. Her image dimmed for a while, but her income stabilized. She traded a short fame for long capacity. The difference between Daniel and Maria is not talent or luck. It is the willingness to let the world see competence rather than image. And that willingness often looks like humility. People confuse humility with failure. It is not. Humility buys you trust that lasts. At the breaking point, the psychological terrain shifts dramatically. The shame that once drove spectacle can become a catalyst for clarity. The pain of exposure focuses attention. When nothing else distracts, you are left with two choices: deeper denial or disciplined rebuilding. Denial is seductive because it promises a restored narrative with minimal cost. Rebuilding is terrifying because it requires small acts of care repeated over time. What does rebuilding look like in practice? First, a brutal inventory. List what you own, what you owe, what you can realistically collect, and what is non-negotiable. Make no excuses. Call it data. Data dislodges narrative. Second, triage. Protect what preserves option value. Cut what is pure spectacle. Renegotiate leases, close one office, return a leased car. Every cut buys runway. Third, create a micro-schedule for repair. Set weekly checkpoints. Show up to those meetings. Respect the process. Small, visible acts of repair rebuild confidence faster than any curated image. There is also a spiritual rewrite that occurs at the pivot. Many people mistake the pivot for failure. It is not. It is the moment the internal logic of the life collides with external reality. If you take responsibility, the pivot becomes initiation. You are initiated into a different relationship with money, one governed by evidence, contingency plans, and deferred gratification. You stop gambling emotional security on transient applause. You learn the discipline of sustaining options. I must be blunt. Many will not choose honesty. They will choose the louder show. The result is often financial catastrophe and relational fallout. The social cost can be severe. Friends who valued the image will drift. Partners may leave. Family trust erodes. Those are painful consequences, but they are often less destructive than years of incremental erosion. The collapse can be fast and reparable. The slow burn is pernicious and often fatal to long-term projects. For those who choose rebuilding, the path forward demands unpopular acts. You must practice scarcity as a strategic virtue. You must learn to enjoy constraints because constraints create creativity and discipline. You must treat your ledger like scripture. You must invite mentors who are not dazzled by your story. You must celebrate compound processes, not snapshots. These acts will feel foreign. They will feel like austerity at first. Over time, they feel like control. There are social practices I recommend for the pivot. Make one trusted financial friend, not an admirer. Someone who will read your statements and call you out. Public confession is useful in a limited way. Telling one accountable person reduces secrecy and shame. Set up a weekly truth session where you and this person review decisions. Make the session sacred. It will be more effective than 100 speeches about authenticity. The pivot also requires internal language change. Replace, "I need to look successful now," with "I will prove my credibility through deliverables." Replace, "The universe will provide," with "I will arrange contingencies and ask the universe for time to execute them." That language change sounds banal, but language shapes thought. It creates micro-intentions that direct behavior. If you are listening and thinking, "This is obvious, I know the sting of recognition," obvious and acted on are different things. The breaking point is where the cost of not changing becomes intolerable. That is a mercy of sorts. It forces an honest inventory. It clarifies priorities. It asks the only question that matters. Are you committed to being wealthy in reality or wealthy only on a screen? When someone chooses the path of honesty and repair, the universe often responds in practical ways. It's not mystical. It is simple. When you have reserves and systems, you can say yes to profitable opportunities and no to distracting applause. You can accept a lower-paid, high-skill project that multiplies. You can negotiate equity instead of fees because you have leverage. Those are the mechanics of recovery. Over months and years, these small choices accumulate into real wealth. Finally, accept that rebuilding will not erase the past. You will carry the scars of spectacle. You may lose followers. You may hear the old critics. Let that be part of the story. The honest narrative is stronger than the curated one. People notice that. They respect a steadier hand over time. Now pause. Where are you in this arc? Are you counting likes as capital? Are your fixed costs quietly swallowing optionality? Or have you already felt a minor shock and are considering a pivot? Does it change the heartbeat? Does it create a pause? Now the ritual. You already heard the inventario do inverso. I'll expand it into a daily architecture. Call it the inventory and the pause. For 7 days, you will pair 2 practices. First, every proposed non-essential spend over X set X to an amount meaningful to you triggers a mandatory cooling off. 2 hours for small purchases, 30 days for anything above X. Second, every time you feel the itch to perform a post, a staged meeting, a purchase to signal status, you log the motive in a notebook. Concrete instructions follow. Step 1. Choose X. For many people I work with, X is 500. For entrepreneurs, it might be 2,000. Make it painful enough to matter. Step 2. Create 3 short columns in a physical notebook. Item, motive, substantive, alternative. No apps. Use paper. Writing slows thought. Step 3. When you consider a purchase or a public stunt, write the item and answer 2 questions in 1 sentence. Am I buying this for appearance or for substance? What could this money buy that increases optionality? Be brief. No excuses. Do this for 7 days. Do not debate. Observe. At the end of day 7, add the totals. How much went toward appearance? How much toward substance or reserves? The numbers are brutal evidence. Evidence wears down story. That is the point. If the tally surprises you, let the surprise be data, not a reason for shame. Shame closes learning. Data opens it. This ritual does 3 psychological things. First, it introduces friction. Friction breaks the loop between emotion and transaction. Second, it creates a habit of alternative imagining. You train your mind to see what the money could do for capacity. Third, it externalizes motive. Writing your intention turns it into a small pact you can later inspect. Small pacts accumulate. They become muscle. Parallel to the inventory and pause, adopt a short phrase to re-anchor in moments of pressure. I give this to people in exactly these words. I will measure my wealth by options, not applause. Repeat it aloud when you feel the scroll sickness or the heat of comparison. Say it 3 times. Use it before you click buy. Use it at 11 p.m. when you are thinking of one more post. It interrupts urgency and invites calculation. Now the harder layer, accountability scaffolding. Internal rituals work, but they fail if you isolate them. You must externalize. Choose one person who will be your financial friend. Not your best admirer. Not your partner unless they are practical. A friend who will open your spreadsheet and ask the small cruel questions you avoid. Agree to a weekly 20 to 30-minute check-in. Show the inventory. Read the tallies aloud. Let someone ask, if this money made you 10x, what would change? The check-in is a reality mirror. If you do not have such a friend, hire a simple advisor for 1 hour. Pay them. The price matters because it creates a boundary. In the hour, ask them to review your cash flow and point to 2 expenses that are pure image. Ask them to identify 1 structural fix that would create runway. Take notes. Do the fix within 30 days. The aim is to swap theatrical investments for structural ones. There is psychological work to accompany the accounting. You will need to rewire narratives that made the old behavior feel justified. The stories are often tender. I worked so hard. I deserve this. If I don't appear successful now, I'll miss the window. Those sentences are true in emotional tone, but they are often false in cause and effect. I teach a simple reframing. Replace "I deserve this" with "I deserve the freedom that abundance buys." Replace "I must look successful now" with "I must build deliverables that prove competence." This is not moralizing. It is reallocation of language. Expect resistance. The loop pushes back. You will experience small failures. You will slip and buy the thing or stage the event. When that happens, do not capitulate psychologically. Practice the repair ritual. Stop. Write why the purchase happened in the notebook. Calculate the opportunity cost in one sentence. Then, next week, create a compensatory act, return an item, cancel a subscription, or funnel the next paycheck into a reserve. Repair is a discipline. It proves to yourself that you are capable of course correction. I also instruct a practical treasury rule. Automate your life towards scarcity that serves abundance. First transfer rule. The moment income hits, move a fixed percentage to savings or investments. Treat it like a non-negotiable. Second transfer rule. Allocate a separate small fund labeled appearance buffer. Yes, set aside an amount monthly for image work, but make it finite and explicit. This prevents appearance from freelancing across your entire budget disguised as necessity. The buffer buys you dignity without bleeding your runway. There is a spiritual dimension too. The old pattern often hides behind metaphors. Money is energy, or the universe will provide. I do not deny spiritual language, but I insist on translation. If you say money is energy, then show me the energy. Where's the reserve? What is the plan for shocks? Language without ledger is abdication dressed as faith. Faith without work is habit. I encourage you to convert mystical language into operational commitments. If you believe the universe will provide, create mechanisms that make that provision likely. Reserves, systems, relationships that deliver. Part of reprogramming is also reconfiguring what you celebrate. I teach clients to create micro-ceremonies for competence. Celebrate a month without an unexpected expense. Celebrate a delivered contract with a small internal ritual, not a staged spectacle. Notice how the nervous system starts to track different achievements. The applause will thin. The sense of agency will thicken. This recalibration is slow. It is worth the impatience. Finally, prepare for social economics. Your network may have been complicit in the old pattern. Some friends rewarded spectacle. Now you need different reinforcement. That does not mean you sever relationships. It means you shift the conversation. Invite one person to a different checklist. Ask them for critique of a product, not an outfit. Surround yourself with people who ask, how does this scale? Rather than how does this look? You will lose some applause. You will gain time. If you accept this work, the first visible effect will be boredom. The world will no longer thrill you in the same way. That is progress. The mind will search for novel pleasure. You must teach it to find it in accumulation of capacity. The inventory, the pause, the accountability calls, the transfers, and the new celebrations are the scaffolding. They change the reward circuitry. Over months, the habit of competence will feel as good as 1,000 likes. This is the beginning, not the cure. The next part will show what life looks like when this pattern takes hold. How do opportunities change? Which doors open when you trade applause for runway? I will describe concrete scenes of life after the reprogramming small moments that reveal a different economy. If you are skeptical, good. Skepticism is a test. The following section will answer it with scenes you can recognize. You will see what the universe reflects when you switch signals. Stay with me. The proof is in the normal days that follow. When the new pattern roots, change happens quietly. It does not show up as a parade. It begins as small differences in choices. I want you to imagine 3 months after you started the inventory and the pause. You wake up and your phone still scrolls. The impulse to compare appears as it always did. But today you catch it. You speak your sentence. I will measure my wealth by options, not applause. The urge softens. Instead of planning a post, you open your finance notebook. You check the reserve. You feel lighter. That lightness is not glamour. It is leverage. The first visible effect is time. You stop manufacturing moments for social proof. You reclaim afternoons that used to be spent curating. You use them to finish a project. That project becomes a deliverable you can sell. It does not go viral. It pays reliably. A client calls because your product solved a problem. You have capacity to take that call because you did not spend the day staging a scene. Capacity creates bandwidth. Bandwidth creates opportunities. Second, you begin to speak differently. When asked by a stranger, "What do you do?" your answer is less theatrical. You describe work in terms of outcomes, not image. You notice that some listeners tilt toward practical questions. They ask about systems, scalability, and timelines. She replaced dinners with a weekly accountability call for mints. Her mints grew into clients. Her reputation shifted from party host to operator. Both cases show the same mechanism. Doing less spectacle and more structure yields different returns. You will also feel internal changes. Anxiety reduces because you stop gambling social reality for emotional security. Instead of needing external validation to feel whole, you measure yourself by a ledger. I know ledger sounds cold. It is not. Ledger is language for what you can control. It trades stories for evidence. Evidence creates trust in yourself. Trust allows patient action. Patience accumulates. That accumulation shows up as compound advantage. This future is not clean. The old pattern fights. You will be tempted to stage one last spectacle when a pressure point appears. The difference now is you have a rule and a ritual. The rule says, the cooling off applies. The ritual says, write your motive. Those two mechanics reroute an impulsive action into a choice. Sometimes the choice is to act differently. Sometimes the choice is to act, but with leverage. You may still post. You may still buy. But you now attach a condition. What will this buy in terms of options? Another visible effect is reputation quality. People who value appearances will gossip. They will interpret your withdrawal as decline. That is normal. People judge what they see. They prefer narratives they can read quickly. Your quiet grows ambiguous to them. But among people who matter for long-term projects, quiet competence breeds credibility. They notice when you deliver reliably. They trust you in ways applause never purchased. Economically, the change compounds. Small decisions reallocated to investments create a runway buffer. Runway buys time to accept the right risks. You start to say no to projects that pay quickly but trap you in one-off tasks. You accept engagements that scale. You hire differently. You invest in training and systems. Over the course of a year, the effect is not dramatic in any single month. It is cumulative. The real turning point often arrives when unexpected opportunity appears, a contract that requires bandwidth you now have. You take it. It multiplies income. That multiplication is the universe answering a different signal. Psychologically, this future rebuilds your identity. Instead of, I am the person who must look successful, you become, I am the person who can deliver value under pressure. Identity shifts how you allocate attention. Attention shapes action. Action changes outcomes. The loop reverses. Competence begets space, not spectacle. Yet the new pattern is fragile. Old cues remain powerful. A friend's new car, the scroll at midnight, an influencer's launch. These cues trigger dopamine. You will relapse. When relapse happens, the repair practices matter. You must treat relapse as data. Run the inventory, tally the leak, and create a compensatory act. The goal is not perfection. It is direction. Direction accumulates. If you persist, the social landscape changes too. Not everyone will celebrate you. Some will leave. That is proper friction. The friendships that survive will be smarter. They will understand compound time. They will ask practical questions in meetings. They will be the ones who read your quarterly numbers. The applause you miss will be replaced by fewer, deeper acknowledgments. Now imagine a year from now. The image on your feeds is quieter. Your bank statement shows reserves. You say yes to offers that require patience and selectivity. You feel a calm that is not smugness. That calm is choice. It is the freedom to act from strength. This is what I call wealth in reality, not visible wealth. It is scarce because the majority choose the visible show. This future will not erase the past. It will hold its scars. You will meet people who remember your old persona. Let them. The honest life has better stories. Over time, you will prefer those stories. You will tell how you rebuilt through small acts, not stunts. And you will find this change contagious in quiet ways. People you respect will ask, how did you do it? You will show them the notebook and the transfers. They will try it. The ripple begins. In the next part 1, we'll put a mirror in front of you. I will ask direct questions. I will offer one minimal, almost impossible to misinterpret step you can take right now. I will not ask for a life overhaul today. I will ask for one act of clarity that proves you can choose differently. Prepare to decide. The next move will determine whether you remain a performer or become an operator. We began with diagnosis and moved through mechanism, collapse, and repair. Let me close with a clear mirror. The pattern we dissected is not exotic. It is common. It is the slow depletion of optionality for the sake of appearance. The world rewards visible drama with short bursts of relief. It punishes the same drama with long-term fragility. I have seen it in startups, in freelancers, in social influencers, and salaried professionals. The anatomy is the same. Ask yourself plainly, in the last 3 months, how many purchases were for impression and how many were for investment? How many posts were rehearsed to signal status rather than to offer work? Are your fixed costs swallowing optionality? Answer honestly. Your answers are not moral verdicts. They are indicators. Indicators tell you where to act. If you found yourself nodding uncomfortably, here is one minimal action you can take right now. Open your bank app. Find the largest recurring or recently added outgoing that exists primarily for image or convenience. It could be a high-end subscription, a lease, a recurring software you never use, or an appearance budget. Cancel it or suspend it for 30 days. No drama, no announcement, just suspend it. That single act will do 3 things. It will create immediate runway. It will test your anxiety, and it will reveal how much of your identity was built on that expense. If suspension feels unbearable, you have data. The feeling is not failure. It is information. Let me offer a short sentence to hold while you act. Repeat it now. I will prove my credibility with deliverables, not displays. Say it once. Say it when you breathe. Make it a small vow. Vows are anchors more than rules. They shape small choices into consistent practice. If you can do the suspension exercise today, leave a note for yourself in whatever place you will check daily. Make it a reminder of the new metric, options over applause. Do not overcomplicate. The mechanics are simple: pause, inventory, transfer, and accountability. Repeat them until they become default. Now a practical nudge. Choose one person to be your weekly truth partner. Tell them you will share the inventory every Sunday for 4 weeks. Tell them to ask 2 questions. What did you buy for image? And what did that buy you in options? If you cannot find a friend, hire a counselor or a basic financial coach for 1 hour and schedule the call next week. Pay them. The transaction matters. It formalizes honesty. You will face resistance. The loop that once protected you will interpret these acts as loss. It will summon anxiety. When that happens, do the notebook exercise. Write what the anxiety says. Then write what evidence contradicts that story. You will see the mind prefers story to ledger because story offers quick relief. Ledger forces responsibility. Choose ledger repeatedly. I will not pretend this is easy. Many will relapse. Some will choose spectacle and double down. They will be louder for a while. The collapse for them can be quick or it can be slow. If you are listening, you have a choice that most will not make: to live in quiet capacity. That choice is less glamorous. It is not headline material, but over years it changes who you are allowed to be in the world. Before I go, one small request. If you recognized yourself in this diagnosis, tell me in the comments where you are from and what one expense you will suspend today. I read those notes. They matter. The small public act of naming bridges secrecy and accountability. It creates pressure that works in your favor. Finally, remember, your relationship with money is also a spiritual practice. It asks you to choose between short triumphs and long freedom. The work is not to prove you are worthy through things. It is to prove you are trustworthy with resources. Trustworthiness compounds. It moves markets, partners, and the people who matter toward you. Decide one thing right now. Suspend the expense. Say the sentence out loud. Schedule the weekly truth call. That is enough for today. Tomorrow, do the inventory. The path is built by small acts repeated. If you start, you will be amazed at what silence yields.